Today's Gemara Moed Katan Daf Beis. Welcome to all the new listeners for a new Masechta, and all the learning should be a tremendous chashuv. V'zochaim the Virgin Remember as he's a kintashan this b'shan Michael Mordechai b'zavshin the Sikup b'zavshin the Shem min Chai Shalom ben Levi Zahava. As well as chashuv Hashem Shmuel Yis ben Vived ben Vived Chaim v'Sar Shem Zivin Reizil Zor Baskin Zivin Basim Zchai Zayv Zol ben Delez Zor Zalei V'Shom Zami V'Shavik Shechana Shmo ben Til Din Chan Reizil Mechai b'Asmin Adilem v'Shin ben Ziv Heg Ver Rivkov Shav Naftali Simech Esther Sar Baskila Shlomo ben Yisachar Esther Yehudes Yifral Avram ben Rachel Haidaya Shimshon ben Chana V'Yav Parabas Esther B'Soy Shar Chayli Yisrael, and we begin with a bracha as always at the same fire, the same enthusiasm, the same geschmack that we begin a new Masechta with, the same drive for clarity should carry us through ultimately the entire Masechta. Another short Masechta Moed Katan. Some say it's the Moed Katan, it's the small Moed. We're about to finish the entire Moed. Incredible, a little bit more than 2 years into the daf. I hope to see many of you at to see Mir Tashem that will be hosting in New York. Please be in touch. But now we'll learn Moed Katan. And we begin, of course, as many people know, the Masechta is going to deal primarily with the halachas of Chol HaMoed. That Chol HaMoed, there is an Isser that is forbidden to do work on Chol HaMoed, aside for certain Ateirim, as we'll see right away. So says the Mishnah, Mashkin Beis HaShlachin B'Moed. One is allowed to water an irrigated field, which of course is a field that needs irrigation, that needs watering. As the Tabrashi points out, it's a field that's standing in a mountain and it needs to be watered. And Rashi points out the very critical and crucial words. Why is it allowed? If you don't do it, it's a big loss. Says Rashi, very important rule to lay down the foundation of this parak, that matters that are going to cause a loss are allowed to be done on Cholol Shamayid. And Rashi really, at the end of the Rashi, mimics the same thing. Rashi says, "Well, malachas are mutter davar sheish by hefsid and meina isa going to water this field." But we're going to see, even though there's an allowance when there's a potential loss, but as we're going to see, that tircha yisera, still excessive work is not going to be allowed. So, case number one in the Mishnah is you're allowed to water an irrigated field on Chol HaMoed, ubishvius is similarly during the year of shmitah. With what are you allowed to water it? Says the Mishnah, whether it's a spring, a mayan that's newly emerged, it's a new spring that you just created, it just started flowing, or whether it's a spring that already was around. And the Gemara is going to discuss the difference. Avol, what are you not allowed to do? Ein mashkin lo mimei geshamim, you're not allowed to water using rainwater of and now the water using the water of a well, and now they make ditches around the grapevines, because these practices, again, it's the same field, it's the same Beis HaShlachim, the same field as Rashi pointed out, that there's a hefsid, but you're not allowed to do anything. You can't do things which are tirchi yisera, you can't do things that are excessive work, as last Rashi in the Mishnah points out. The reason why you can't use rainwater, because it is excessive work. Says the Mishnah, Rav Elazar ben Azariah, you're not allowed to make an irrigational canal for the first time in Chol HaMoed, ubeshvius as well on shmitah. You're allowed to make it on shmitah. And now the Mishnah continues with other things you're allowed to do on Chol HaMoed. And you're allowed to fix that which is damaged on Chol HaMoed. And you're allowed to fix the damaged cisterns. And you're allowed to dig a ditch deeper. You can't dig a ditch for the first time, you can dig it deeper, it's not as much work. You fix the roads, and the different wells of water, voice called Sarchei Rabbim. So that's another heter. So heter number one we saw in the Mishnah was Davar Hefsid. We saw in the Mishnah something that's going to cause a loss. And within something causing a loss, we said, but it can't be Tircha Yisera, can't be rainwater, can't be excessive work. Now the Mishnah concludes with another heter. Something which is Seirech of the Rabbim, the public needs it, the Gemara will elaborate, is another heter. And the Mishnah concludes with Masayanim as like Varais, you'll have to mark off the graves, the Yitzin Afal Kila'im, you let it go out to inspect the fields for Kila'im. So in general, we're going to begin by the discussion with regard to what practices are allowed to be done on these irrigational fields in order to prevent the loss. Says the Gemara, Now that you tell me that you're allowed to water the field with a new spring, a new mayan, what's special about a new mayan? Rashi points out, and the Gemara actually says, the first time you dig a well, you dig a spring, there's the concern that what's going to happen? It's going to collapse. It might not work. So if the Mishnah taught us you're allowed to take that gamble, you're allowed to do the work on the potential, on the perhaps that you're going to have a spring, mashkin, you're allowed to use it. An old spring, a spring that you know works. It's been running and flowing and the water comes forth. There's no concern it's going to fall. Does the Mishnah have to teach us it's allowed? Says the Gemara, the classical kasha. Once we know the bigger chiddush, once we know the more novel din, once we know you can even dig and create a well and create a spring that might not work, certainly you're allowed to water the field from a spring that will work. Answers the Gemara, Amri Yitzrach, we need both cases in the Mishnah. If you taught me only the case of the new spring, I would have thought, only in this case, in the case that is a concern the spring will not work, then only in that field are you only allowed to use it to water the irrigational field. There's the concern. Therefore, you're only allowed to use it for the Beis HaShlach and the field that really needs it. The field that you're going to have a hefsed, a loss if you don't water it. Aval, this is the Havamina, this is what you would have thought. You know what you would have thought? Well, that's already been around, the spring is flowing and there's no concern. You know what you would have thought? Is not going to fall. You could think you can use it everywhere, even in a Beis Habal. What's a Beis Habal? A Beis Habal is a field that does not need the water as much, and it's not going to be a hefsed if you don't water it. Yeah, you would have thought, what's the big deal? There's no concern the spring won't work. Kamash Malan. So on that, the Mishnah teaches us the chiddush. Whether it's a new well, whether it's an old spring, whether there is a concern it's going to fall, whether it's not a concern it's going to fall. Beis HaShlachim in, Beis Habal loy. You're only allowed to use it for Beis HaShlachim, only for the hefsid. When there is a hefsid, when there's a potential loss, then you're allowed to water the field, even if it might collapse this irrigational spring. But when there is no hefsid, then when there's no hefsid, Kamash Malan, that even a Beis Habal, you're not allowed to water. You're not allowed to water even the Beis Habal. That the same rules apply to both the Beis HaShlachin and to the Beis Habal. That you're only allowed to use. I'm sorry for the confusion. You're only allowed to use the spring. You're allowed. One more time, let's say it again. Let's just read it together. Whether it's a new spring, whether it's an old spring, you're only allowed to use it for the Beis HaShlachin and not for the Beis Habal. Hopefully now it is clear. Now the Gemara says, 1 second, let's pause for a moment. What's a Beis Habal? What's a Beis HaShlachin? Irrigated field, not irrigated field. Where do those words come from? So says the Gemara, where do we know that Beis HaShlachin comes from the word of sichusi, of thirst, like we said, it's on a mountain and it needs the rainwater, needs the extra watering. If not, it's going to cause a loss. How do I know? The pasuk says, you're tired and you're faint and exhausted. What is the targum? What is the translation of onkeles? Mishali ulai maya. Ulai, and you were mishali and you were exhausted. And from here we see that shali means faint, and that's what we're learning out, that it needs the extra watering. Ask the Gemara, and how do we know that Beis Habal is the opposite? It's the wording that means it's settled, it doesn't need all the rain. The pasuk says, when a single man sleeps with a single woman, and what is the translation of Targum? Ari. Array, as a young man settles down, Oilam am besulta, with this woman who's never married, so too your children will settle in you. And from this pasuk, we learn out that when someone settles down and he gets married, he's no longer all over the place. He settles down literally. He's not wandering from place to place. So too is the field is settled. It doesn't need all the extreme rainwater. So that was a little bit of an aside. The Beis HaShlachim is the field that that needs the rainwater, Beis Habal is not. And we just learned the Chiddush that whether it's in a new spring, whether it's an old spring, there's only a heter for a Beis HaShlachin. Why? Because of the potential hefsid that's going to happen. Asks the Gemara, 7 lines from the wide lines, Aman Tana de Pseida in Harvachaloi. The whole premise of the first part of today's year, the first 10 minutes was what? That a Beis Habal is not allowed. Why? Because that's Harvacha, that's going to give you a profit. A Beis HaShlachim is allowed. Yes, why? Because Pseida, it's going to be a loss. Who is that, Tana? And Va'afilu b'makim Pseida. And even in the Beis HaShlachim, even in the field that you might have the loss, what do we say in the Mishnah? Mitrach nami lo tarchinan. What did the Mishnah teach us? That you're not allowed to cause a tircha. You're not allowed to use the rainwater. So who is the Tana that says, number one, there's only an allowance because of loss, and number two, the allowance is only when it's not a tircha? Yisera explains the Gemara, Amar Ravuna, 4 lines from the wide lines. Rav Elazar ben Yaakov, he is Rav Elazar ben Yaakov. The Tanan as we learned in the Mishnah. Rav Elazar ben Yaakov, Eimer moishchenes hamayim ilan le'ilan. You let it draw the water from one tree to the next, as long as you do not water the entire field. So what we think right now is that you're afraid that the other tree is going to get a loss, and because you're afraid it's going to have a loss, you're allowed to do a malacha, and you're allowed to water it from the other tree. But says the Gemara, 1 second, but what's going on? Rav Elazar just taught us a din that harvacha loy. He just taught us that you're not allowed to cause a profit. But did he teach us this din that b'makam seido we are allowing it? Meaning, we see half of the din. We see that you're not allowed to cause a profit. Great! But where do we see that if there's going to be a pseida, there's going to be a loss, then we are allowed to do something? Elamar Rabba on the second wide line rather explains Rabba, Mani Rav Yehuda, the Tana of the Mishnah is Rav Yehuda. The Tanya as we learned in the Raisa. Mayana yoyte betchila, the first time you're using the spring, mashkin mimenu, afilu sada Beis Habal. So clearly Rameir is not like a Mishnah, because this is the whole first part of today's discussion, is that Rameir is allowing you to water even a field that does not need the water so much. Very lenient. Rav Yehuda Aimer in the middle. Ein mashkin el tzad beis hashlachin shecharva. Only water a beis hashlachin, that charva that dried up. We'll see what that means in a moment. Rav Elazar ben Azariah Aimer loikach v'loikach. Neither of these opinions are correct. Loikach v'loikach. Yes, Rav Kinam Rav Yehuda. Leifana adam am samayim v'yishkel ginasa l'chavasai. Person cannot clean out the irrigation of the canal and water his garden or his ruins on cholha v'chol shal moed. So 3 opinions. You have the most lenient of Rameir, a very chomer of Elazar ben Azariah, and Rav Yehuda in the Mishnah. And we're suggesting that Rav Yehuda is the Tana of our Mishnah. But before we get there, explains the Gemara, my charva. What did Rav Yehuda mean? Rav Yehuda said you're not allowed to water only the Beis HaShlachim shecharva. What shecharva? Ilim acharva mamish. You're going to tell me it's literally dried up, it's nothing, it's a destroyed field. Lamali damashkile. What are you watering? It's a destroyed field. Amar Abaya shecharva mimayon zeh. You know what is dried up? It's dried up that the spring finished and you need a new spring. That's the Chiddush. And the Chiddush here is, Rav Yehuda says, you're allowed to create a new field. Why? Because the Sada Beis HaShlachim, because of the potential loss. Clearly the Tana of our Mishnah that holds the same thing. That due to the potential loss, we're allowing you to water the field. Says the Gemara of Elazar ben Azariah, now we're explaining the last opinion in the Brisa. So what does Elazar ben Azariah mean? Whether the spring dried up or not, you're not allowed to water the field with a new spring, even a Beis HaShlachin, even though you can have a massive loss. You're still not allowed to. Why not? Because he's concerned that the irrigation, that the spring will fall down like we spoke out. Therefore the Tana of the Mishnah is clearly Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, 1 second, Mimaya, Abaya, how do you know what you're saying is correct? 2 lines to the bottom. When did Rabbi Yehuda only allow for a Beis HaShlachin and not for a Beis Habal? Only allowed when there's a loss. Maybe that's only by the Mayan, that is the first time. Why? As we explained as we turn over to Beis and Beis, because the Maslan Pule we're afraid it's going to collapse. It might not work. Maybe Rav Yehuda holds like we spoke out of the Havamim of the Gemara. Maybe Rav Yehuda holds that if you have a spring that already was established and there's no concern, maybe Rav Yehuda allows you even to water the Beis Habal, the field that doesn't really need it. So how do you know that the Mishnah, which only allows a Beis Hashlachin, only allows the field in the mountain, only allows a field because of the loss? How do we know that is Rav Yehuda? Explains the Gemara, Im came 3 lines to the Tam, Masnizan Amai Tarmei. Who is going to be the Tan of our Mishnah? We're stuck. As Rashi eloquently points out, it's not Rav Elazar ben Yaakov, it's not Ramir, it's not going to be Rav Yehuda. So who is the Tan of the Mishnah? Ella, what are we forced to say 4 lines from the top of Beis and Beis? The Rav Yehuda must be, what is the opinion of Rav Yehuda? Lo shana mayin sheyatsa b'tchila, lo shana mayin sheyatsa b'tchila, Beis Hashlachin in, Beis Habal, lo, just like we started off in the Gemara, there's only an allowance for a hefsid or a loss of a Beis Hashlachin, and what is the allowance? The allowance is whether it's a new spring or not. And that is the conclusion. We can call it really a part 1 of today's shiur, is learning the first rule of Cholam Ha'id, that all work on Cholam Ha'id is not allowed. A big misconception. What is allowed because of hefsid, because of a loss? And when there's a potential loss, then it's still only something that's not going to have a tircha yesira, like using rainwater. Something like making a mayan, making a spring will be allowed, but something not because of a loss, like a Beis Habal, there is no heter. Says the Gemara, we're actually in the middle of a line, So why do the Brisa speak out explicitly the case of a mayin sheyatsa b'tchila the first time using it? If we're explaining now, the Rav Yehuda is explaining whether it's new or whether it's old. You know why? Because our mayor, very, very chamer, very lenient. Even a spring that's ready, that's brand new, Rameir allows all the way to the extreme. Even though it's a new spring and it might fall, you're allowed even for a Beis Habal, even a field that does not really need it. Says the Gemara, Itmar, new topic, 10 lines down. First line is Afilu. So in weeds or so in waters, his seeds on Shabbos, Mishamayim Masrinam Bey, what do you have to give him Hasra? What are you warning him for? What's he about to commit? What's he about to do wrong? Machlaikis, Rab Amar Misham Chayrish, Rav Yosef Amar Misham Zayreya. Machlaikis, Rab and Rav Yosef, and Amar Rabba Kavasi Didi Mistavra. Rabba says, I'm right. You know why? Mar Darkel Shal Chayrish, what is Chayrish? What is plowing? L'Rapue Ara, you're weakening and softening the land. The Hainami Mar Puyara, that's what this guy is doing over here by weeding and watering the seeds. And Amar Rav Yosef say, Didi, Mr. Avram, right? You know why? What are you planting? You're growing something. So Abai and Rava each point out that they are correct. Respectively, Rava saying Chayrish and Rav Yosef saying planting. And Amar Lea Abai comments, L'Rabba. Ledidog kasha, L'Rav Yosef kasha. Says Abai, I have a question on everyone. You both said you're right. You're both wrong. Ledi dachte you Rabba kasha misham chayrish ein misham zarei alai. The Rav Yosef Kasha, Misham Zareya in Misham Chayrish Lai, says the Gemara, what's going on? Each one of you hold only Chayrish, only Zareya. Maybe you'll suggest, maybe this is a rule. Maybe this is a rule in all the Shabbos. Anytime you have 2 potential malachas, you only chayav 1. Says the Gemara, is not true. Rav Kahana explains Rav Kahana, Gemara in Shabbos, Tafai and Gimel. Zoymer v'tzarich leitim, so in prunes, and he needs the wood. So he did 2 things. Chayav shtayim, achas v'sham noit. You're pruning, meaning you're causing it to grow more, number 1. And you're cutting it down, you need the tree. So asks Abaye, Rav Yosef, Rabba, Chayrish, Zareya, how could you be mutually exclusive? How can you not each hold of the other? And says the Gemara, indeed, Kasha Abaya, that is a beautiful question. We do not have any defense for neither Rabba nor Rav Yosef. Now says the Gemara, it is a good kasha, but now we go a bit deeper into this machlokes Abaya and Rav Yosef. Rabba and Rav Yosef, excuse me. Eisvei Rav Yosef Abaya, about 20 lines down. The first line is Eisvei. So Rav Yosef asks Rabba, You Rabbi hold Mishab Chayrish plowing. Hamenachish Mechaber Kila'im says the price of someone who weeds or someone loosens the ground up for Kila'im, like a Kila'im planting two different seeds, two different breeds together, you get Malchus. Rav Kiva Omer Afa Mekayim. Even if you just allow the Kila'im, you saw Kila'im growing, you saw two species growing, and you let it be. Explains the Gemara. Again, this is Rav Yosef asking Rav. According to me, then what do I say the issue is? The malacha and its potential plowing. Makes a lot of sense. You can't plant a Kila'im. According to you, Rabba, the Amr Mishav Chayrish, the one malacha is plowing. Chayrish beKila'im mi'asira. So Rav Yosef asks, Abai, Rabba, is there such an isser of plowing Kila'im? And Amr Lei, Rabba responds, Chayrish beKila'im mi'asira. Is that true? So Amr Lei. So Rabbi responds, you know what? Mishum Mikayim. You're right. There's no plowing the Kila'im. But you know what it means? It means you're a chayav because you maintained the Kila'im. You're Mikayim it. It says Gemara, 1 second. What the Brisa said. Well, Mikdani Sefer of Kiva Rav Mikayim. It's very clear. The first part of the Brisa said one thing. Then it said you're usher because of Mikayim. Clearly the first part of the Brisa didn't know the cause of its Mikayim. Explains the Gemara classically, Kula Rav Kivi. Really the whole Brisa is one opinion. Matam Kamer, and the Brisa is explaining itself. Why, if you weed, why, if you loosen the ground, is it forbidden by Kila'im? Why? Because of Mikayim, because you're allowing it to live. As Rabbi Akiva explained, that you're not allowed to let the Kila'im live. My time of the Rabbi Akiva, the Tanya is Kila'im, you cannot plant Kila'im. Mikayim and Ayim, where do we see you're not allowed to let Kila'im live? We darshan the pasuk that you can't have it in your field at all, and that is how Rabbah defends his opinion to Rabbi Yosef. One more kasha. Tonight we learned in the Mishnah, our Mishnah. Mashkin b'zashklashim b'moyid u'b'shvius. Says the Gemara. B'shlama moyid. I understand why you're allowed to water on chol moyid. Sham tircha. What's the whole isra, as we explained today, of doing malach on chol moyid? Is tircha's work. B'makom seida shay rabbanan. In a place of loss, the rabbanan were lenient. Elishvius. What's the imalacha on shmitah? Bein l'madam mishum zareya, bein l'madam mishum chayrish. Whether Rabba or whether Rav Yosef, whether you say the isser is planting, whether isser is plowing, zareya v'charisha b'shvius b'shari. Is there ever a heter to plow? Is there ever a heter to plant on shmitah? Amar Abaye, earth-shattering words. B'shvius b'zman hazeh v'Rabbi. To my shmitah b'zman hazeh, which is only a din derabana. The Tanya Rabbi Omer is the davar hashmitah shamait, and he darshins the baslik b'shtei shmitas hakasav medaber. So about two different types of shmitah: shmitah karka v'shmitah ksafim. And we darshin b'zman shatam meshame karka, when there's a din of shmitah on the land midaraisa, then atam meshame ksafim, all loans go back. And as Rashi so eloquently points out, 2 lines from the bottom, he says that obviously we see from here there's a time that shmitah is not daraisa, and that's what the pasuk is going to come to teach us, and we'll pick it up from here in the next year. Amir Hashem.